You turn toward the deepest parts of your life with a question that matters. It does not arrive with drama and simply rises, patient and heavy, from the place where your days have been quietly breaking open for years. You feel it first in the chest, then behind the eyes. A single unfinished sentence that is weighted beneath every other sentence you have ever spoken. You wait for language to come back. Nothing arrives. The hush that follows is so complete it presses against the skin of your thoughts, gentle and immovable. You notice how innocently you had expected return, how the mind had already prepared a small shelf for the answer, a place where it could be carried like a smooth stone in the pocket. Yet the silence refuses every translation. It will not shrink itself into something portable. It does not argue. It does not scold. It simply withholds, and in that precise withholding you begin to feel the shape of your own demand. How many times you have asked the depths to learn your language instead of the other way around. Still you sit inside the question. The chair holds the familiar weight of your body. Lamplight falls at its unchanging angle across the table. The refrigerator murmurs in the next room. The refusal does not pull you away. It only draws nearer, courteous, almost protective, as though something too large for words is being kept from being broken by them. And as the mind begins offering its theories, its small panics, its hunger to fill the pause, the silence holds. It reveals the reaching itself. It nests inside the ordinary textures of your evening, between your fingers, inside each breath, inside the small scar on the back of your hand, until the line between the question and the quiet room grows impossibly thin. This is where the descent begins, not by leaving your life, but by entering it so completely that the refusal slowly becomes something else, the ground you walk on. You turn toward the deepest parts of your life with a question that matters. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fanfare or thunder. It simply rises, patient and heavy, from the place where your days have been quietly breaking open for years. You feel it in the chest first, then behind the eyes, a single unfished sentence that is weighted beneath every other sentence you have ever spoken. You wait for language to come back. Nothing arrives, no sentence, no explanation, no quiet reassurance that could be whispered later in the dark and recognized as your own. The hush that follows is so complete it seems to press against the skin of your thoughts, gentle and immovable at once. You notice how automatically you had expected return. The mind had already prepared a small shelf for the answer, a place where it could be set down, examined, repeated, carried like a smooth stone in the pocket. This certainty feels almost innocent now, how thoroughly you believed that anything real must be speakable, recordable, able to survive translation into the small sounds we use with one another. Yet the silence refuses every translation. It does not argue, it does not scold. It simply does not hand you the thing you can hold. And in that precise withholding, you begin to feel the shape of your own demand, how long you have asked the depths to shrink themselves into something portable. How many times you have waited at this same threshold, expecting the deep to learn your language instead of the other way around. Still you sit inside the question. Your breath moves, soft and unhurried, reminding you that you remain here, intact, listening. The refusal does not push you away. If anything, it draws nearer, so close it begins to feel courteous, almost protective, as though something too large for words is being kept from being broken by them. What if this is not rejection? The thought floats past, not yet claimed. You do not seize it. You only notice how the expectation of return has been met, for the first time, by something that will not return in the old way. The question is still alive in you. The silence is alive with it, and between them moves a tenderness you do not yet have a name for, but which already feels like the first honest gesture you have ever received from the deepest parts of your life. You stay. The hush stays with you, patient, descending one slow layer beneath the demand that it speak. You feel the hush descend one slow layer further, not by drawing you away, but by arriving exactly where you sit. This is the room you already know, the one that has witnessed every version of you without comment. The chair supports the familiar weight of your body with the same worn patience it offered an hour ago. Lamplight falls at its unchanging angle across the wooden table, catching the faint grain of the surface and the small scar on the back of your left hand. From the next room comes the refrigerator's low, intermittent murmur, a sound so constant it usually fades into the architecture of the day. A personal question surfaces among these plain details. It is not theatrical. It carries the texture of your actual life, the quiet ache that travels with you through grocery lists and unread messages and the particular way you close the door at night. For a moment it seems language might meet it. A few words stir, then nothing arrives. The words simply stop. No explanation forms, no reassurance settles in its place. The room remains untouched by the refusal. The chair does not shift, the lamplight does not dim or brighten in surprise. Your hands rest exactly where they rested, palms open, fingers relaxed, skin holding the ordinary temperature of the air. The refrigerator cycles on again with the same mindless steadiness, and the walls keep their distance. Everything continues as it was, ordinary and unstartled, as though the silence had been living here longer than you have. You notice how the question itself seems native to these surroundings. It does not pull you into some inner theater. It sits among the dust motes turning slowly in the lamplight, rides the faint draft moving across your wrists, rests inside the small pause between each breath. The hush that refused to answer in the depths now rests inside the very objects that make up your Tuesday evening, courteous and unobtrusive, asking nothing and changing nothing. One layer beneath the surface of the scene, the silence grows more intimate. It slips into the way the fabric of your shirt touches the skin of your shoulder, into the subtle pressure of your back against the chair, into the microscopic pauses inside the refrigerator's hum. You are still here, still breathing, still surrounded by the same textures that have held every ordinary hour of your life. The inquiry has not transported you. It has only asked you to remain more completely inside what was already yours. The refusal does not demand a special state. It does not require darkness or solitude or ritual. It simply inhabits the room you already know, moving through the lamplight and the chair and the faint electric voice in the kitchen with the same patient steadiness it moved through the deeper question. Nothing is displaced, nothing is elevated. The silence lives where your life already lives, nested so quietly inside the familiar that it can only be felt when the words stop and the ordinary is allowed to remain exactly as it is. Your gaze returns to your hands, the same hands that have washed dishes and written notes and rested on the shoulders of people you love. The silence is there too, in the spaces between the fingers, in the stillness that holds the quiet pulse beneath the skin. It refuses to become remarkable. It refuses to leave the life that is already yours. And so the descent continues, not by abandoning the everyday, but by entering it so fully that the line between the question and the quiet room grows impossibly thin. Beneath that impossibly thin boundary, the first tremor appears. You notice it as a small, almost courteous panic, the sense that something must be done with the quiet before it settles too deeply into the bones. The mind does not wait for permission. It leans in at once, offering shapes, offering language, offering anything that might close the gap. A theory arrives first, then another. You watch the familiar machinery engage, each new thought arriving with the faint metallic click of old habit. One suggestion explains the absence as a test. Another reframes it as depth too subtle for speech. A third insists you simply have not waited long enough. The sentences stack quickly, eager, overlapping, each one reaching for the place where an answer should rest. Yet every completion dissolves the moment it touches the hush, leaving only the dry taste of effort behind. You become aware of a heat gathering behind the forehead, a restless fluttering at the wrists. The body, still seated in the same chair, begins to feel the mismatch. Where stillness was promised, movement now crowds in. The urge to finish the thought yourself grows almost physical, like a hand that keeps opening and closing around nothing. You notice how the mind hates a pause it cannot colonize. It would rather be wrong than empty. Deeper beneath that flurry lies the discomfort itself, raw and immediate. It wears the texture of thirst felt in the wrong place, not in the throat, but somewhere just behind the sternum, a hollow that words were always meant to line with something solid. Each new idea is dropped into that hollow and falls straight through. The falling itself becomes audible, a soft, repeated impact that echoes only inside you. The more the mind speaks, the louder the echo grows. You sit with the strange recognition that this noise is not opposition to the silence, but its first real disclosure. The hunger was always here, patiently waiting for the right conditions to show itself. Every theory, every polished sentence, every quiet rehearsal of what the depths might mean has been nothing but an attempt to feed that hunger before it could be seen clearly. Now the refusal holds the bowl away, not in cruelty, but in a mercy so precise it feels almost intimate. A single clear moment opens. You see how much of your life has been spent carrying answers around like small stones, turning them over, showing them to others, weighing them in secret. The silence will not add to the collection. It simply reveals the hands that keep reaching. And in the revelation, the reaching slows, not from wisdom yet, but from sudden exhaustion. What remains is the tender ache of having been caught in the act of grasping. You are still here, still breathing inside the ordinary evening. Yet something in the posture has changed. The mind continues to murmur its half-formed thoughts, but the murmurs now arrive inside a larger listening that does not argue with them. The discomfort stays warm against the skin, alive, instructive. Beneath even that warmth, the question turns 1 degree further. If the silence can so easily expose the machinery that was supposed to conceal it, then perhaps the refusal has already begun its work, not by withholding an answer, but by letting you watch the precise shape of the hunger that needed the answer to exist. The room has not moved. The lamplight has not changed its angle. Yet the first layer has been passed through, and what looked like interruption now feels like the beginning of being answered in a tongue that has no words. You breathe inside the tender ache and feel it begin to loosen its hold without any effort on your part. The larger listening does not argue with it or try to finish what it started. Instead, the discomfort itself grows quiet, settling downward as though sinking through its own exhausted surface. What rises to meet you then is not relief, but the silence in its rawest form, no longer screened by hunger or the need to repair the moment. This silence has texture. It is dense, almost viscous against the skin of your throat and the thin membranes of your eyelids, a substance neither empty nor full that occupies the exact space where your body meets the air. You notice how it resists the usual impulse to slip through it, how it lingers instead with a slow, heavy patience that makes every small movement feel measured and deliberate. The texture does not come from anywhere. It is already here, already touching. Beneath that first impression of density lies something more watchful. A steady pressure gathers behind the eyes, not painful but insistent, as though the silence has turned to look directly at the one who waits. The pressure widens the space inside the skull without filling it, revealing how accustomed you had become to filling every interval with movement or explanation. Now nothing moves. The watching continues, courteous in its stillness, holding the shape of your attention without once asking it to become something else. One layer deeper, and even the idea of texture begins to thin. What remains is refusal made palpable. The silence does not merely wait for words to arrive. It actively withholds them. Each time a fragment of language rises, it is met with the same unhurried boundary, turned aside so gently that the turning itself feels like care. You sense the precision of this refusal in the way it matches the exact size and shape of the question you carried, never too much, never too little, as though it already knows what would happen if even one usable sentence were allowed to form. The refusal deepens. It presses against the wrists where the pulse continues its quiet work. It rests along the length of the breath, slowing the inhale just enough to show that the silence is not passive, but chosen, moment after moment. You are still here, still reading, still feeling the faint warmth of your own blood moving beneath this denser field. Nothing has been taken from you, only the illusion that the answer could ever be lifted out and carried away like an object has been set aside. Further in, the refusal reveals its own contours. It is not rejection. It carries no anger, no disappointment, only an unflinching steadiness that seems to arise from a place that has never needed to speak. The pressure behind the eyes becomes almost companionable now, a shared knowing that words would shrink what is being offered, would turn the living depth into something you could pin to a wall or repeat to another person on a different Tuesday. The silence will not permit that diminishment. It refuses with the quiet authority of one who protects what cannot survive being named. You rest inside the density. The watchfulness holds. The refusal continues its patient, almost tender work, layer beneath layer, each one stripping away the wish for portability until only the unportable remains. A question floats up, whether this has been the answer all along. But the silence meets it, too, turning it aside before it can harden into conclusion. The ordinary evening has not moved. Your body has not moved. Yet everything feels heavier, richer, more intimately guarded than before. And still the texture deepens. Still the texture deepens. Then a further loosening occurs, so subtle at first that it might be mistaken for continuation. The dense patience, the watchful pressure, the palpable refusal, all begin to lose their distinct edges. They do not vanish, they simply reveal themselves as appearances arising within something quieter, something that does not itself possess texture or weight. What remains is the one who notices. You. You notice the question that first turned you toward this evening. You notice the refusal that has accompanied it through every layer. This noticing carries no sentences, no explanations, no inner voice shaping what it receives. It is pure reception, a field without borders in which everything simply appears. The faint rhythm of your pulse, the temperature of air moving through your nostrils, the way a distant sound momentarily pulls attention before releasing it again. All of it rests here without effort, without commentary. The ordinary gestures of attention continue without owner. A trace of earlier restlessness arises, is seen, and subsides. A slight adjustment in posture happens by itself and is registered without judgment. Even the desire to understand this very layer appears within the noticing and does not disturb it. Everything is given room, nothing is turned away. This is the listener's only activity, if it can be called activity at all, an unceasing permission that requires no effort and leaves no trace. This listener you are has no words of its own, yet nothing is hidden from it. Every earlier movement, every softening, every shift in the quality of silence appears to it with perfect neutrality. There is a tenderness in this neutrality, though no one claims it. You remain the same person, seated in the same moment, still breathing, still receiving these words as they unfold. Yet the ground of your experiencing has grown strangely intimate and vast at once. Here the complication deepens. The silence you have sought does not lie beyond this listener, as though one more step downward might finally reach it. His silence is the medium in which the listener itself appears. Without it, there would be no noticing, no sense of a question meeting a refusal, no descent through layers at all. The very one who has been following this voice through the evening arises each instant within the silence, made of it, sustained by it. The refusal, then, takes on a new complexion. It is not an act directed at you from some deeper place. It is the silence declining to step out of its role as ground in order to become one more figure appearing against that ground. You sense this not as a thought to be grasped, but as a quiet reversal in the direction of attention. All this while you have been reaching from the familiar territory of words and hopes for answers toward an imagined silence that might consent to speak. Now it becomes clear that the silence was never the destination. It is the origin. The words arise inside it. The listener arises inside it. The entire inquiry arises inside it. To ask from within the silence rather than toward it would mean resting as this wordless noticing, allowing even the longing for resolution to appear and be held without being answered in the old way. Your eyes blink. The world resets for the briefest instant and is known again. A thought about what comes next forms, lingers, dissolves back into the field that never moved. None of this requires your management. The one who notices does not tire, does not hurry, does not insist on conclusions. It simply remains, vast enough for every sensation, every memory, every unanswered question to find its momentary place. The evening continues its ordinary course around you, its small domestic sounds and shifts of light, all of them now seen as expressions of the same silent medium rather than interruptions of it. Deeper attention to this listener reveals no center, no fixed point where a separate you resides apart from the noticing. The noticing notices itself noticing, and even that movement unfolds within the same wordless field. The refusal has been courteous beyond measure. It has declined every invitation to become small enough to be carried away in language, not out of cruelty, but because only in this unportable form can it deliver what you actually sought. You feel no alarm at this complication. There is only a soft settling, a recognition that feels ancient and immediate at the same time. And so the descent through this third layer does not end in greater density or clearer refusal. It ends in the recognition that the one asking has always been made of the silence being asked of. The direction feels wrong no longer as accusation, but as tender revelation. You may have been inquiring upside down, beginning from the periphery of language and striving toward a center that was never absent. The center was the asking itself. The center was this listening that has no tongue, yet hears the unsaid in every sentence. What if the silence has been answering all along? In the only language large enough to match the question. What if that language is the very appearance of the listener, who can hold the question without closing it. The inquiry rests there, not concluded, but included. You are still here, reading, listening, breathing inside the medium that makes every word possible, and yet refuses to be captured by any of them. The third layer opens not onto new content, but onto the simple fact of this opening itself, where even the sense of layers begins to feel like another appearance lovingly allowed. And even this vast, centerless noticing, this opening that holds every layer as an allowed appearance, now loosens its own borders. You feel the gentle yielding, the way the field of pure reception itself begins to rest inside something quieter still. No new texture arrives. No pressure against the eyelids, no companionable steadiness. Only the recognition that this listener you are has never stood apart from a deeper quiet that does not watch it arise. This quiet does not wait for the next pulse of curiosity. It does not refuse the reach of language, nor does it accept that reach. It simply holds the possibility of watching and waiting and reaching without ever taking part. You remain here, still reading, still breathing inside the ordinary hour. Yet the one who reads and the words themselves now appear as movements within a ground that needs no witness to be what it is. Deeper beneath that recognition, the distinction between listener and listened to grows strangely transparent. The question you first carried, the one that opened this entire descent, no longer points outward toward an answer it might receive. Instead, every prior layer, the discomfort that once rattled behind the sternum, the dense patience that pressed without pressing, the borderless permission that allowed even restlessness to be seen, reveals itself as having been borrowed from this same ground. They were never obstacles to cross. They were expressions of its generosity, allowed to appear and dissolve without disturbing what allowed them. One layer further, and even the sense of generosity begins to thin. What remains is not an experience at all, not a silence you meet, not a presence that cradles, only the condition in which meeting and cradling become possible, the unseen basis that lets the lamplight fall across the table exactly as it falls, that lets the faint shift in posture register without needing to be registered. You sense how thoroughly this ground precedes every gesture of understanding. Before the first impulse to fill the hush with theory, before the courteous turning aside, before the tender reversal that showed you were made of the silence you sought, this ground was already there, unmoved, unasking. And in that precedence, the original encounter quietly reverses itself. The silence was never refusing to answer you in words. It was refusing to become an answer. Any word offered would have stepped forward as one more figure against the ground, something portable, something you could set beside the question like a small stone in an open palm. This ground will not step forward. It will not become another object you might defend or one day outgrow. It simply continues as the open palm itself, as the space in which stones and questions and palms can appear at all. You notice how naturally the reversal settles. There is no drama in it, no bright arrival, only a subtle widening in which even the idea of descent feels like one more allowed ripple. The discomfort that once felt metallic and urgent now looks like a brief color moving across the surface of water that never changes temperature. The dense watchfulness that pressed behind the eyes appears as a single breath momentarily taken inside a stillness that neither inhales nor exhales. Each earlier movement remains exactly as intimate as it was, yet seen now from the place that makes intimacy possible without ever tasting it. One layer beneath that noticing, and even the metaphor of surface and depth loses its hold. The ground does not watch itself being used as a metaphor. It does not wait for you to catch up. It does not refuse the metaphor or welcome it. It remains what makes the catching up possible, what lets the mind reach for images and then watch those images arise and fall away. You are still here. The chair still bears your weight. The evening still moves through its unremarkable minutes. Yet none of these things any longer seem to require an explanation that could be carried out of this moment. The refusal you first met, so precise and courteous, now reveals its deeper courtesy. It would not hand you something that could be carried out of this moment. It would not reduce itself to language that could be repeated later, as though the ground could ever be set down. So it remains silent in the only way that honors what you actually asked for. Not an answer, but the ground that makes every answer, every question, every asker, momentarily possible. And still the descent does not stop. Even this last recognition rests inside the same quiet that does not recognize. The layers themselves appear as gentle folds within what has never been folded. You breathe. The breath appears. The one who notices the breath appears. All of it inside a stillness that does not appear, that never needed to refuse, that simply cannot become any of the things it makes possible without ceasing to be the possibility itself. The ordinary hour keeps its rhythm around you, yet a further loosening arrives without signal or sound. Here the refusal turns one last time, and its hidden mercy begins to appear, not as explanation, but as the gentlest possible withholding. Any word offered would have become an object small enough to slip into the pocket of your days. You could have taken it out at convenient moments, turned it beneath lamplight, shown it to someone you trust, defended its edges when challenged, or simply set it on a shelf and walked away. Understanding, you realize, always arrives wearing the shape of something portable, something that fits inside memory the way a key fits inside a hand. The mind is built to carry. It collects, it stores, it drops what grows heavy. And for that very reason, the silence will not hand you what can be dropped. You feel the precision of this refusal now, how courteous it is in its restraint. A sentence would have let you finish the encounter. A clear answer would have let you close the book, mark the page, move on to the next ordinary task with the satisfaction of having been answered. But what you turned toward in the quiet was never meant to become another possession resting inside your life. It was the openness that makes every life possible, the listening that holds every question before it is asked. To reduce that openness to language would be to hand you a cup of the river and call it the current. You could carry the cup, you could drink from it or pour it out. The river itself would remain untouched, and you would have been gently betrayed by the very gift you thought you wanted. Deeper still inside this mercy, the certainty presses closer. Every understanding you have ever sought has worn the clothing of portability because only the portable can be owned, taught, argued over, forgotten, found again. You want to carry truth the way you carry a photograph of someone loved, something you can look at when the person is absent. Yet the silence refuses to become the photograph. It refuses to become anything that lets you step outside the relationship even for a moment. The refusal is not coldness. It is the tenderness that will not diminish what you asked for by making it small enough to leave behind. Layer beneath that layer, the withholding reveals its true size. What you actually reached for in the beginning was never a content that could rest inside awareness. It was the awareness that no content can exhaust. Any word given would have become a landmark you could visit and then depart from. The silence withholds landmarks. It keeps the whole country open, roadless, measureless. You remain here, still breathing, still feeling the chair beneath you, still hearing the faint pulse of the refrigerator in the next room. Yet nothing has been added to the collection of things you own. Nothing has been given that you could later lose. And in that absence of the carryable, the mercy lands, soft as the space between one thought and the next. The refusal is the only form large enough to carry what you truly asked for, because what you asked for was never meant to be carried at all. It was meant to carry you. No sentence could do that without shrinking into something you could eventually set down. So the silence simply stays open, vast enough to hold the asking, the not knowing, the ordinary hour, and the one who sits inside it all without ever becoming another object among objects. You do not leave this layer with an answer. You leave it with the quiet knowledge that the refusal has been protecting the integrity of your question from the beginning. It has refused to betray you by becoming small enough to fit inside the life it sustains. The body stirs without fanfare. You rise from the chair, and the ordinary hour folds itself around the movement, each small adjustment of balance carrying the same refusal that first met your question. No ceremony attends the standing. Only the faint creak of floorboards, the shift of fabric against skin, and the immediate press of gravity that feels somehow more honest now. You drift toward the kitchen. Fingers close around the kettle's handle, water rushes into its hollow with a bright, momentary roar, and the switch clicks home. While the heat gathers, you stand at the counter and watch the slow dance of steam. The silence does not hover above these gestures. It nests inside them, inside the particular weight of the mug, inside the small burn where hot ceramic meets palm, inside the first cautious sip that travels downward like a secret told only to the body. You do not pause to interrogate the quiet. It simply travels with the swallow, with the second sip, with the decision to set the mug down again. Messages wait on the small, bright rectangle. Your thumb rises, scrolls, answers. Words leave you, practical, warm, unhurried. And something in their departure has changed. The old impulse to fill every gap has quietly stepped aside. Between the lines you type, the same courteous withholding that once protected the depths now sits inside the typing itself. When replies arrive, they are met without the old hunger for completion. The exchange breathes. A pause between sentences is no longer an emergency. It is simply another room the silence enters, unannounced and at home. Later, eyes find yours across a table, across a screen, across the brief distance of a sidewalk. In that meeting, the nesting deepens further. The glance contains the small, involuntary smile. The smile contains the tiny catch of breath. The breath contains the listening that needs nothing translated. Their words rise and fall. Yours follow. Yet beneath the whole conversation rests the same tender refusal that would not hand you something portable. You notice how the voices touch without trying to finish one another. No demand arises to turn the shared hush into speech. The silence rides inside the tone, inside the brief laughter, inside the moment when gaze lingers a fraction longer than habit once allowed. The entire exchange feels larger, not because more is said, but because less is required of the quiet. Through the afternoon, the pattern repeats in softening succession. The reply to an email nests the same listening. The folding of a shirt carries it in the precise alignment of sleeves. The walk down the hallway holds it between one footfall and the next. Each ordinary gesture becomes a smaller container that nevertheless opens into the same unarguing ground. You feel the shift most clearly when another person speaks and you simply remain, neither rushing to answer nor tensing against the space their words leave behind. The silence no longer feels like an absence you must repair. It travels nested inside every gesture, changing the taste of the hours without altering their shape. Even the small domestic sounds, water running, a door closing, a chair pulled back, now arrive wrapped in that same patient permission. You move through them without naming what accompanies you. The demand has fallen away so gradually that its absence registers only as a gentler light on the walls, a softer weight in the chest, a wider moment between thought and action. The day continues. You continue inside it. And the quiet continues inside every motion, wordless, courteous, carrying nothing and therefore carrying everything. The ordinary motions carry you forward until the stream itself thins and every gesture settles into the single instant now unfolding. These words reach you one by one, each one riding a faint current of sound that ends before it finishes. You are listening. Beneath the cadence of the voice, the same refusal continues without announcement, patient, courteous, exact. Listen closer. The syllables arrive and something inside you receives them before any meaning can crystallize. That receiving has no edge. It neither waits for the next phrase nor hurries to complete it. The question you once carried through the rooms of your life has not gone elsewhere. It sits here, soft against the sternum, meeting the quiet that will not coat it with explanation. One layer deeper, the listening itself is heard, not by another listener, but by an openness that needs no center to remain open. The voice continues, tender and unhurried, yet its tenderness is only a shimmer across something vaster that refuses to become even tenderness. You feel the small catch behind the eyes when language tries to finish what cannot be finished. The catch passes. Nothing replaces it. The refusal stays courteous enough to leave the ache untouched, warm, instructive. Deeper still, and even the ache is allowed to appear inside a stillness that does not refuse or accept, that simply holds the entire movement of asking without ever becoming the thing asked for. These sentences are being spoken now. Your attention rests inside them now. The silence does not sit behind the voice or beneath the voice. It is the medium in which the voice appears, the same medium in which you appear, listening. What tastes like this moment when the question and the quiet touch without closing around each other? No image arrives to decorate it, only the immediate pressure of sound against awareness, the gentle widening that happens when no answer rushes in to fill the space. You are still here. The breath moves, the words move through the breath, and beneath every movement the refusal remains perfectly intact, protecting the original question from ever shrinking into an answer you could set down and walk away from. Layer after layer collapses into the single pulse of this listening. There is no return journey left to make. The kitchen, the messages, the eyes met across tables, all of them were already this. The silence has never been elsewhere than the exact place where these words are heard. It will not hand you a conclusion. It only offers the living texture of the question meeting the quiet that will not answer in words. And in that meeting, something in you loosens further, settles further, without needing to know how. The voice continues, you continue. The refusal continues, patient as the space between one heartbeat and the next, holding everything without taking anything away. This same listening continues without fanfare, and the days begin to prove what no layer could fully name. You move through them now without insisting that the silence learn your language. The original question stays open, not as a wound, but as a space that travels with you, shaping nothing and therefore shaping everything. Work happens inside that openness. The hands lift what must be lifted, the mind turns toward problems that ask only for attention, not for cosmic resolution. Each small decision unfolds without the old hunger for a final sentence that would make the uncertainty disappear. you discover that clarity and mystery can walk side by side, that the next practical step does not require the whole country to be mapped. Love, too, finds its native depth. You listen to another voice, and the pauses between words no longer feel like failures. A glance lingers a moment longer because nothing needs to be sealed or solved. Tenderness passes between you like breath itself, unclaimed, unmeasured, allowed to arrive and leave without becoming property. The silence that once seemed an obstacle has grown into the very room where real contact can occur. Rest arrives at the close of things with a different quality. The body settles, the thoughts thin, and what remains is not victory over the unspeakable, but simple companionship with it. You are still here, still breathing, still carried by what never needed to explain itself. Layer after subtler layer has dissolved, until even the idea of layers feels like an old story. What is left is this ordinary life held inside the open question the silence has always protected. The refusal no longer feels like refusal. It feels like the ground itself, firm enough to walk on, soft enough to rest inside, vast enough for every joy and sorrow to appear without diminishing it. Stay with the refusal long enough for it to become the ground you walk on. Nothing more is said, because nothing more can be said. In the warmth that remains after these words, the entire descent and return rest inside one continuous gesture. The silence refused to hand you something portable, not out of cruelty, but from the gentlest possible mercy. Any answers small enough to carry would have eventually been set down, defended, or forgotten. What you truly asked for was never an object at all. It was this, the living openness that lets you move, work, love, and rest without turning life into a problem to be solved. The silence protected the question's integrity so completely that the question and the ground of your life could finally recognize each other. If these moments have kept you here until the final pulse, let that faithfulness be known in a single, quiet act. In the comments below, write these exact words in first person so the listening can continue between us. I no longer demand that the silence speak my language. I stay with its refusal until it becomes the ground I walk on. When that sentence lives in the open, turn now toward one of the videos appearing on screen. Let its voice meet you in the same place, carrying this listening forward into whatever hour waits for you.